Okay, so in this build we're going to be working on a belt-driven linear actuator called the Mini V, and you can see it has end caps here on the ends as well as the belt running through the center of the track and the Mini V carriage plate. And we've added a slot cover or two just to dress it up a little bit, but this is a really nice little actuator that gives you, on the end plates here, it gives you the ability to mount multiple configurations onto the Mini V gantry plate as well as V-slot itself. So these can be joined together to make all kinds of different machines. So make sure you check out the examples. And also remember that you can build these at different lengths as well. So it's just a matter of lengthening the belt and the extrusion. So you can build these pretty much as long and as short as you want to fit your build needs. So let's go ahead and get started with the build. All right, so let's start off by building one of the 4 Mini V wheels. And so we'll start off with the wheel shell and one of the bearings and just press it in here like so. And we're going to go ahead and insert one of the Mini V shims and then the other bearing. So the Mini V shim is sandwiched in there. And that's basically how you build them. You'll have another shim as well as an M5 nut, and we'll just save that for later, but we'll go ahead and build all 4 of these now. Okay, so we have all the Mini V wheels built, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step. On this step, you're going to need your Mini V gantry plate, as well as 4 of your M5 screws, and 2 of the 6mm aluminum spacers. And if you look at the gantry plate, you'll notice there's 2 larger holes and 2 smaller holes. These are of the recessed type here. And we're just going to put the screws through the 2 smaller holes here. And then we're going to go ahead and slide our aluminum spacers on, just like you see here. And then one of the Mini V precision shims, and then the wheel, and then the M5 nut. Put that together and create a system that looks like this. Same thing on this side, Mini V precision shim, the wheel, and the M5 nut. And that looks good. Now we'll go ahead and tighten that down. That looks great. Just make sure everything's turning smooth. We have these tightened down now. We're going to focus our attention on the 2 larger holes here. We're going to introduce the eccentric, which is a cam system that allows us to adjust these wheel sets. Let's go ahead. First of all, I'm going to do one at a time and just put the screw through there. And then I'll put my eccentric in there. You can see it locks in just like that. And then we'll just continue just like we did the other set of wheels. We're going to put our Mini V precision shim on, and then our wheel, and then the M5 nut. Just hand tighten for now. We're going to do the same thing on this side. We'll put our screw in, put the eccentric on, precision shim, the wheel, and the M5 nut. We'll go ahead and tighten this down, but we don't want to over tighten these because we still want to be able to adjust the eccentrics. Okay, so we have those on, and once again I just snugged those. I didn't over tighten them. If you look closely, you should be able to see the 6mm marking on the eccentric, and that shows you where the furthest point of the cam is. So let's go ahead and take that 6mm marking and we'll face it by using a wrench and turning these. We'll face it out. That'll give us the biggest spacing between the 2 sets of wheels here. There you go. Make it spin out. Now you don't want the wheels to be loose at all. You want them to be snug, but just not overly tightened so you can't turn them. But if you look close, if it'll show up, you can see we have the 2 markings there. And that looks great. Let's move on to the next step. On this step, we're going to introduce the V-slot into the system. And what we're going to do is take our Mini V gantry plate and we're going to make sure that it fits on here and it's locked into the rail. As you can see right now, it's loose because we do not have the eccentrics tightened down. So what you want to do, I have the eccentrics on the top here, and you can see those 2 are the eccentrics. It slides on just like that, so the eccentrics on this side. Okay, so then what we'll do is we'll take our wrench and we'll turn these until they lock onto the rail. And I like to set it down like this. and just slowly turn them until they're locked in. And you want to alternate between the two. And you can see that I'm just checking to see if they've locked on yet. Now I have these on here, but to be honest with you, it's too tight. So first thing I like to do is just hold the gantry plate in place and kind of spin the wheel and see which one's tighter, and then we can kind of back these off a little bit. And like I said, alternate back and forth until you get an even friction between them. But you shouldn't have any wobble, which I don't, but you should have a nice, smooth, easy, fluent movement here. So that's really good. Let's go ahead and finish tightening down these M5 nuts so we can set these in place. Okay, so we've tightened that down, and just make sure your wheels are still turning smooth. And let's put it back on here, and we'll just double check, because it does, sometimes when you tighten that down, it moves them a little bit. So let's go ahead and same thing. I'm just going to hold the plate in place. I'm going to feel which one's tighter. It's this one here. I'm going to back that off just a hair. That is nice and tight. It's locked on there. It's not going anywhere, and yet it can roll nice and smooth. So that's really great. Okay, let's move on to the next step. On this step, we're going to go ahead and build our idler pulley kit, and basically it works the same way as building any other wheel. We'll take one of our bearings, push it in. You'll need your 1/8 inch plastic spacer. Put that in there. Just kind of center it somewhere the best that you can, and put your other bearing in place. You could take the screw and align that. Sometimes it helps to spin it. There we go. And then I'll squeeze it. So there's that. And what you have left over is a precision shim and an M5 nut, as well as a 25mm screw. This screw we're not going to use for this build, so we'll go ahead and set this to the side and move on to the next step. All right, so for this step, you're going to bring in your end mount, as well as your idler pulley and the hardware that is still with it, which is the shim and the M5 nut. You're also going to need 2 of the 6mm spacers, as well as a 35mm M5 screw. And for this step, you're going to need a pair of needle nose or something to hold on to these aluminum spacers as we work this smooth idler pulley in there. So what's going to happen is we are going to installing the smooth idler pulley in the center here between the 2 6mm aluminum spacers. So to start off, I'm just going to use the 35mm screw and just get it started in here. Slide one of the 6mm spacers on. That's the easy one. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the smooth idler on. And I'm just going to tilt it like you see here. And I'm going to just try to work this other 6mm spacer in here. You can see that I have it in here. Line it up a little better. And you basically just have to angle it and kind of just wedge it in there. Once you have it in there, it will roll smooth. You can see there, we can go ahead and add our shim and our M5 screw. Our M5 nut. And we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Okay, that looks great. Just, you don't have to over tighten that, just make sure it's tight and that you can still roll the idler pulley. And we can, that looks great. Let's move on to the next step. All right, so for this step, we're gonna take our double T-nuts and we're going to be mounting them like this on the inside. You also want your 6mm M5 screws. And what we're gonna do is just loosely mount these on, just like you see here. And we're doing it loose because we want to be able to slide these into the V-slot. So we may have to adjust them in or out later. So what's going to happen is the T-nut itself has to slide in here, just like that. So you may need to turn these to loosen them to get it to work, but this is what we're after. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of pre-install all of these and just keep them loose. Just get them started, and we'll put all 4 of them on. So you have 4 T-nuts and 8 of the M5 6mm screws. Go ahead and put those on now. And you'll notice the flange is facing in. So you want to make sure it's like that. You can see how I'm just using my finger underneath to kind of line it up, hold it in place while I start the screw. At this time, you really don't even need a tool. Just get it started with your fingers. They should be loose, just like you see them here. Okay, so this completes the idler pulley end of the Mini V actuator. So we'll set that to the side for now. We'll move on to the next step. All right, so in this part of the build, we're going to go ahead and build the motor end of the Mini V actuator. So you're going to need your NEMA 17 motor, the end mount plate, 4 of the 6mm aluminum spacers, as well as 4 of the M3 12mm screws, and you're going to need your timing belt pulley. And you can see that we've already inserted the little set screws in there, and we've backed them off. Just make sure that you can slide this onto the shaft, that it goes on there freely. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and get started with the build. All right, so the first thing we want to do is probably going to set this up because it's a little bit difficult to get all the screws in and get the spacers on and everything. So we're probably just going to use our motor as kind of like the stand. So you got to think ahead a little bit where you want your motor wires to come out of. Do you want them to be facing down? Do you want them facing out of the back here? Depending on how your build is set up, it just depends on where you want them, or where you'd like the motor wire. So I think I'm gonna face mine out of the back here. And first thing I'm gonna do is just take and put the screws into the mount right now. And you may need to use a pair of the needle nose to get the back ones in there. So I'm gonna grab the head like that and drop it in there. You can see we have all 4 of them in there. That looks good. And then I'm just going to set my spacers right on top of the motor and just try to align it the best that you can. But before you go all the way down there, make sure that you put your pulley in here right now. You can see we have it in here. I'll just see if I can align that a little bit with the bottom hole and just line everything up and kind of let it slide right on there, just like you see there. So you should be able to go through and just tighten down the screws. Okay, so that looks good, and you can see that, we still need to tighten up our set screws here. So just, do your best to center this and just tighten down the set screws. Okay, so that looks great. Everything's on there nice and tight. One of the things I want to mention though is to make sure that the pulley is mounted directly onto the shaft without any movement. You really don't want any play or movement in there because it will translate into the Mini V actuator. But that looks great. Let's go ahead and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so in this step, we're going to add the T-nuts, the double T-nuts onto the mount, just like we did for the idler pulley mount. So again, with the flange facing in, like you see here. Just going to put my finger here to hold it in place. And we have the 4 double T-nuts, and we have our 6mm M5 screws. And just by hand, a couple turns into the threads of the double T-nut so that they're loose. And we'll work all 4 of these on. Alright, so that looks good. We have them all in there loose. You could also just slide the double T-nuts into the V-slot if you wanted to and screw them in that way. I just find that it's easier to do this way. So that looks great. Let's move on to the next step. Alright, so in this part of the build, we've brought our V-slot back in here. We have our idler pulley plate as well as our motor end plate. The assembly is starting to come together. So with our belt here, we want to go ahead and fish the belt into the center of the V-slot here, down through the center, with the teeth facing up. So it's going to be just like this, just going in like this. Now, if you're doing a longer version of this, you may want to take a piece of wire and put it through first and then pull the belt through. Whatever's easiest, but I can just feed it through like that. It should work fine. There it is. So the main thing to keep in mind with this setup is just try to make sure that it doesn't twist like on the inside of this. You want to make sure you have a nice straight flow through here. So that looks good. All right, so we'll work the end of the smooth idler end first, and we're just going to fish this belt right around the smooth idler pulley and back up through the top here, just like you see there. And bring this over. And we're just going to work on getting the V-slot and the T-nuts lined up. If you find that it's tight, just loosen it up a little bit. And the idea is to bring it in until, let me flip this over, till the bottom hits the V-slot here, just like that. And go ahead and set it down. Make sure it's flush, and you can go ahead and tighten these screws down. They don't have to be extra tight. They're already holding pretty good as it is. Because this one we actually will be adjusting later. If we need more tension on our belt, we can move this back and forth to gain that tension. All right, so that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and feed this into my gantry plate. Kind of roll that along there till it comes back up. And you can see that the teeth engage with each other here. And this is how we lock this on. We're going to take a couple zip ties and we're going to lock that in place. All right, so I have a couple of the 4-inch zip ties here. I'm just going to bring that back up out of there. And we're going to lock this in place. It doesn't have to be super tight right now. Let's just get it started. One of the things I do like to keep in mind when I'm doing this is just to look at the orientation of the zip tie. Make sure we're in the right spot here. Because I like the head of the zip tie to be uniform. So it looks nice and neat. And that looks pretty good right there. And we'll take another one. I like to put 2 of them on here. And again, the head, just to make sure it's all going to be the same and uniform, I'm going to make sure the head's facing the same way. This one I'm going to put a little closer to the inside. Doesn't have to be super tight. It looks great. And snip these off. All right. And that is what you're after right there. You can see we have it locked on there. That looks great. Doesn't interfere with the end. So I have about 1 inch, I'd say. I actually have about 1.5 inches there. We have plenty of room to work with. So that looks great. All right, so we're going to be doing the same thing we did on the idler end, except this time we'll be going around the timing pulley. So go ahead and fish this around. Make sure your belt is not twisted in there, first of all. So the belt is still running with the teeth up, and of course it loops around this side. So you just want to make sure the belt is not twisted inside of the shaft here. And get yourself some extra belt there. And then the same thing, we're going to work on getting the T-nuts into the V-slot. And as they go in, you can kind of see how they angle a little bit. So you just need to loosen them up. It'll slide on there. All right, now we can go ahead and tighten it down. Okay, that looks great. See, we have it tightened on there. Everything looks nice. And we're going to go ahead and thread it through like we did last time. Right through the notch in the plate there. And I like to, there we go. Push it through there. That looks good. Might need your needle nose to bring that out of there, out of the track there. Nice. Plenty to work with. And don't worry about it being loose, because like I said, we'll go through and tighten it, but you want to get it as tight as you can at this point. We'll cut the excess off. There we go. That looks good. It's not overly tight. We'll worry about that in a minute. Bring in our zip ties here. There we go. Try to keep it as uniform, spacing as you can so it looks nice. And also on this one, because we had the extra, we'll go through underneath here and just snip this excess belt off as well. All right, see that it's working really well. All right, so first of all, we want to tighten the belt up a little bit here, so just go through and crack these screws loose a little bit. We want to be able to move this idler end down a little bit to tighten this belt up. Let's go ahead and move our gantry plate to this end, away from the idler end. We'll flip this over, and what we're going to do is, the idea here is just to move this over. So we could take a screwdriver. I just have a screwdriver in there. I'm just turning it a little bit, and I'm just going to tighten these down. Just the bottom ones a little. That looks good. Let's see how that did tension. Oh yeah, that's nice. So we have it, you know, tensioned out here, but in doing that, it did cock the end plate a little bit. So we're just going to push this flush and just line it back up, and then tighten it, you know, keep it flush across the bottom and tighten everything down. All right, so that completes the Mini V linear actuator build, and that looks great. That's a really nice linear actuator, and one of the coolest things about this actuator is because the plates have threaded holes, you can mount other end mounts with the same 20mm spacing here and here right to these threaded holes here. You just mount the whole actuator right on top. You can mount multiple actuators together. If we bring in this other actuator, you can see, because we have 20mm spacing on the ends, that using a couple M5 screws, we could go ahead and screw these together like this way, to make all kinds of really cool machine configurations. And also, because of it being V-slot and modular, we can also mount right to the V-slot itself for different machine configurations. It's really limitless. The possibilities that can be done with this actuator are awesome. Really look forward to seeing what you guys come up with using this system. Thanks for watching, and all the best with your builds.